Ethan Carr stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, untouched scotch in hand, watching the city that worshipped the world he built. Synterra Labs, his empire of artificial intelligence and machine learning, stretched across multiple floors just 3 blocks away. Cold, brilliant, efficient. Like him, he hadn't spoken to anyone about anything personal in weeks. Not even Nia, his longtime house manager, who had stopped asking how he was years ago. She knew the rhythm. Work, silence, sleep, repeat. The view was perfect. The silence was perfect. So why did it all feel so damn empty? A notification pinged on his phone. Jesse. Investor dinner confirmed. Luca DeSantis. Next Thursday. He's bringing Camille. He specifically requested you bring a life partner. His words. Ethan let out a slow, humorless breath. Of course he did. He tossed the phone onto the sleek marble counter and walked into the kitchen. Everything around him gleamed. Stainless steel, imported stone, designer fixtures. But none of it felt lived in. A smart fridge, fully stocked by grocery apps. A kitchen that had never known laughter. A home that echoed. He poured the scotch down the drain and turned to Naya, who had just entered, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Luca wants me to bring someone to this dinner. A partner, he said flatly. She raised an eyebrow, not surprised. You going to ask your laptop? I might. At least it listens. Ethan, she said gently, drying a glass. You know this game. Investors like Luca, they don't just want numbers. They want to know who's behind the machine. And what if who's behind the machine doesn't care for charades? Then maybe it's time you did. He didn't respond. Instead, he opened his tablet, pulled up a short list Jesse had compiled. Professional companions, media coaches, image consultants, all polished, all perfect. All wrong. He swiped through them with increasing frustration. Each profile was a script, a performance in heels. He needed someone who wouldn't flinch in a room full of sharks. Someone who wasn't bought in spirit, even if the evening came with a paycheck. That's when he remembered her. The barista. Rain sliding down the coffee shop window. A customer shouting about almond milk. And her, calm, composed, not backing down, not giving in, and still smiling. Not fake smiling. Real. Strong. He stood up. I need to go out. Nia blinked. At this hour? He grabbed his coat. I need coffee. The bell above the cafe door chimed softly as he stepped inside. Warm air and the rich scent of espresso wrapped around him like a forgotten memory. She was behind the counter, focused, her hands steady as she poured a latte with the kind of care most people reserved for loved ones. She didn't notice him at first. Next, she called, her voice bright. He stepped forward. Hi, Riley, right? She looked up, startled. Yeah. Do I know you? He smiled slightly. You served me a week ago. Difficult customer. You handled it well. Her eyes narrowed. That guy was a nightmare. You didn't flinch. Impressive. She tilted her head. So, you came back to compliment my customer service? Not exactly. He hesitated, then extended a card. Ethan Carr. Synterra Labs. She took it, then stared. Wait, you're that Ethan Carr? Unfortunately. She crossed her arms. So, what does the tech god of Seattle need with a broke barista? He respected her directness. I need a date, for a dinner. One night. I'll pay you well. Her face froze. Excuse me. It's a formal event. An investor with very traditional values. He expects me to bring a partner. You want to hire me to pretend to be your girlfriend? He nodded once. Exactly that. Silence stretched between them. The espresso machine hissed like it disapproved. She laughed once, but it wasn't amused. That's insane. I know. Why me? He met her gaze. Because you're not trying to impress anyone, and I need someone real. She studied him for a long moment, arms still folded, fingers tapping her elbow. I don't know what kind of fantasy you think I'm in, but I've got rent, a sister who needs a tutor, and a busted laptop that barely runs Word. I'm not playing pretty woman. It's not that. I'll pay you for your time, your professionalism, nothing else. Still, she hesitated. How much? He named a number. She blinked. That's generous. You deserve to be compensated fairly. She looked down at the card again. This is the weirdest offer I've ever gotten. He offered a small smile. I hope it'll be the strangest thing that happens to either of us this year. Riley was quiet for a long time. Then finally, okay. But I have conditions. Name them. No touching. No fake pet names. No lies that can't be undone. Agreed. And if you make me wear sequins, I walk. He chuckled. Understood. She glanced around. Let me get someone to cover me for 5 minutes. When she returned, she slid off her apron and joined him near the door. So, what do I call you? Mr. Carr? Ethan? Ethan is fine. She nodded. All right, Ethan. Let's go figure out what the hell I just said yes to. As they walked into the rainy Seattle night, she tugged her hood over her head. Ethan offered her his umbrella. She glanced at it, then him. This isn't a date. He held it higher to cover them both. I know. But as the rain hit the pavement in soft rhythms and they walked side by side, something shifted. Neither of them noticed it then. But a story had just begun. One with a price, a performance, and a surprise that not even Ethan Carr, with all his algorithms, could predict. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The rain hadn't let up, a steady curtain tracing lines down Ethan's car windows as it wound through the city toward Capitol Hill. Inside, silence filled the luxury SUV like fog. Riley sat in the passenger seat, arms crossed, watching neon signs blur against the glass. So, she said finally, her voice cutting through the quiet. Where are we going? Wardrobe fitting, Ethan replied without looking up from the traffic. And a short briefing after. I want you to feel confident before Thursday. Riley raised an eyebrow. You say that like this is a corporate onboarding. He glanced sideways, just for a moment. In some ways it is. She smirked and looked out the window again. Do I get dental? He actually laughed, quiet, unexpected. We'll discuss benefits after the dinner. The car pulled up in front of a boutique with discreet signage and floor-to-ceiling windows glowing with soft light. A woman in her 50s waited at the door, all sharp lines and elegance, like she'd walked out of a Vogue spread. That's Lauren, Ethan said. Stylist. Very good at what she does. Riley took a breath. Okay, I can do this. Inside, the boutique was warm, scented with faint jasmine and cedar. Lauren greeted her with a measured smile and a firm handshake. You must be Riley, she said, eyes sweeping over her. Excellent bone structure, confident posture. We'll go minimalist glam, nothing overdone. Understated speaks louder. Riley blinked. Hi to you too. Ethan watched from a nearby chair as Lauren led Riley through racks of gowns, Silk, satin, muted tones, and bold cuts. At first, Riley seemed overwhelmed, her fingers brushing fabric like it was breakable. But slowly, she found her rhythm, cracking jokes, rolling her eyes at anything with sequins, demanding pockets. Eventually, she stepped out in a floor-length navy gown. Clean lines, off the shoulder. It framed her figure without trying too hard. Ethan stood. His reaction surprised even him. His breath caught, just slightly. Riley tilted her head. "Too much?" "No," he said softly. "It's perfect." She laughed, flustered. "Okay, settle down, Mr. Carr. It's just a dress." Lauren gave a small nod of approval. "We'll hem it slightly. Shoes next." Back in the car, Riley stared at the dress bag beside her, like it might combust. "This is the weirdest Tuesday of my life." Ethan smiled faintly. "Just wait until Thursday." They pulled into the underground garage of Sintera's headquarters. Riley followed him through a private elevator, eyes darting around the sleek, silent lobby. "Wow," she whispered. "I feel like I'm about to enter a spaceship." "It's quieter," Ethan said. "Less chance of distractions." The elevator doors opened to his private floor. Glass walls, living plants, minimalist design. Every surface seemed to hum with purpose. "Sit anywhere," he said, gesturing to the soft grey sofa. "Would you like something to drink?" "Water's fine," she said, still scanning the space. He poured 2 glasses and sat across from her. A file sat on the table between them. Briefing notes, key talking points, profiles of Luca and Camille. She picked it up and leafed through. "So this is what dinner with billionaires looks like." "Flashcards," Ethan chuckled. "More like survival tools." They worked through the notes, Riley absorbing facts, asking sharp questions. He was impressed by how quickly she understood the tone of what was needed. Charm, wit, emotional resonance. Not fake, just intentional. "You really think this Luca guy cares who you date?" she asked. "He does. He believes a partner reflects your character. He won't invest in someone who seems emotionally disconnected. So you hired a girl with overdue rent and a second-hand laptop. Bold choice." Ethan looked at her carefully. "I didn't hire you because of your resume. I hired you because you're unshakable." She blinked at that. Silence. Riley glanced down, then cleared her throat. "What happened to you?" He didn't answer at first. "I had someone once," he said quietly. "Back in college, brilliant, warm. We talked about building something together. Then I found out she'd been seeing someone else, wealthier, older, more established. I wasn't enough." Riley's expression softened. "That sucks. I swore I'd never let anyone judge me by anything but results again, so I built results. And in the process," he trailed off, looking out at the skyline, "I lost everything else." She watched him for a moment, then said softly, "Maybe this dinner isn't about Luca at all." He turned to her. "Maybe it's about seeing if you're still in there somewhere." There was a long pause. Ethan stood abruptly. "I'll have Jesse coordinate final logistics. Thank you for today." It was gentle, but it was dismissal. Riley didn't push. She gathered her things, rose from the couch, and walked to the elevator. But just before the doors closed, she looked back. "You know, for what it's worth, I think whoever left you made a mistake. Because even if you're half the man you pretend not to be, you're still more than most." The doors slid shut. And Ethan, standing alone in a space built with steel and silence, felt something crack, just slightly, in the walls he'd spent a decade building. Not collapse. Not yet. But something had shifted, and for the first time in a very long time, he didn't want to be alone. The morning light slid quietly across the penthouse floors, catching on chrome and glass but never quite warming the space. Ethan stood at the espresso machine, staring blankly as it hissed and steamed. He hadn't slept much. Not because of stress. He could handle billion-dollar negotiations in his sleep. But because of her. Riley Monroe. That comment she made right before the elevator doors shut. It kept looping through his mind like a faulty algorithm. Even if you're half the man you pretend not to be, you're still more than most. She wasn't supposed to say things like that. She wasn't supposed to see through him. He took a slow sip of coffee and turned to the skyline. Thursday was closing in fast. Luca DeSantis was flying in that afternoon. Camille with him. The dinner would make or break a potential $400 million investment. And all Ethan could think about was whether Riley would show up and shatter the room again with that unfiltered honesty. He tapped his tablet, pulled up her file. Jessie had added a note. Confirmed. Riley available for final walkthrough today. 3 p.m. He didn't know if he was relieved or nervous. At exactly 2:59, the elevator dinged. Riley stepped out in jeans, boots, and a soft green sweater, hair pulled into a loose bun, coffee in hand. She looked like she belonged here, and absolutely didn't, all at once. "Hi," she said nonchalantly, as if this wasn't the most unusual contract job she'd ever taken. "Hey," he replied, trying to sound neutral and failing. She walked past him, taking in the expansive living room again. "So, final walkthrough. You got cue cards or are we winging this?" Ethan handed her a small stack of note cards. She took one, read it aloud dramatically. Riley Monroe, former marketing exec. Now consulting part-time to allow for travel and writing. She looked up. "Wow, I sound both boring and pretentious. You need to seem credible." She tossed the card on the table. "Why not just say I'm a barista?" "Because Luca would never believe I'm dating a barista." "Well, newsflash," she said, folding her arms. "You are." There was tension in the room now, not aggressive, just charged. She wasn't angry. She was challenging him, daring him to rethink his assumptions. And something in him liked it, even as it unnerved him. "Fine," he said. "Let's rework the story. What would you say if someone asked how we met?" "We did meet at my job," she said. "Why not use that?" "You came in, I made you a cappuccino, and you, being socially awkward, offered me money to be your date." He raised an eyebrow. "Socially awkward?" She smiled, painfully. He smirked. "Okay, fair." They moved through scenarios. How to respond to Camille's likely probing. How to handle the inevitable, "So, how long have you been dating?" question. As they rehearsed, the lines between pretending and revealing started to blur. "Tell me something true," Riley said suddenly, lowering her cue cards. Ethan hesitated. "What do you mean?" "I mean something not on the script, something real, that only someone close to you would know." He stared at her. She waited. "I read the same book every January," he said at last. "East of Eden," by Steinbeck. She nodded slowly. "Why?" "Because every time I do, I catch something I missed. And it reminds me that being brilliant doesn't make you immune to weakness." Her voice softened. "That's unexpectedly poetic." He shrugged. "Your turn." "Okay," she said, her eyes drifting. "Sometimes I write in the margins of library books, just tiny notes, not to vandalize them, more like leaving breadcrumbs. Like someone might need that thought someday." He looked at her differently now. "You believe in strangers reading your thoughts?" "I believe in connection," she said, "even if it's anonymous." There was a pause, and then Jesse's voice came through the penthouse speaker. "Ethan, Camille and Luca's flight just landed. Dinner confirmed for 7. Riley, I'll have hair and makeup to you by 5. Copy that," Riley said, glancing at Ethan. "Looks like we're really doing this." He nodded. "Yeah, we are." She grabbed her coat but hesitated near the door. "Ethan." He looked up. "I've done a lot of weird things for money, but this might be the most human." He tilted his head. "Why?" "Because for the first time I feel like I'm getting paid to be seen." Then she was gone. Later that afternoon, Ethan found himself pacing. Not something he did often, but the space felt too still, and his thoughts were anything but. He was supposed to be focused on Luca, on the pitch, on the strategy. But Riley was occupying more space than logic allowed. Nia entered quietly with a fresh cup of tea and set it down without a word. He looked at her. She finally said, "She's different." He nodded once. "She'll challenge you," Nia added. "That's not a warning." "It's a blessing." He didn't answer. Nia just smiled and left him there. By 6:30, Riley returned, this time transformed. Hair softly curled, makeup glowing, the navy gown fitting her like it had been sewn onto her bones. She wasn't just stunning. She was radiant in that effortless, painful kind of way that didn't announce itself, but somehow made everything else go quiet. Ethan's breath caught. "You look—" She raised an eyebrow. "Dangerous?" He swallowed. "Exactly." They rode down in silence, the elevator hum and low jazz from the car their only soundtrack. Neither said much, but the air between them was thick with anticipation, not just for the dinner, but for what would happen after. As the driver pulled up to the waterfront restaurant, Ethan turned to her. "Are you ready?" Riley gave a small smile. "Ask me again in 2 hours." He stepped out first, then turned to help her. For a split second, their hands touched longer than necessary. And just like that, Seattle's night swallowed them whole, the next act of their strange, careful story about to unfold. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The restaurant looked like it had been carved out of light. Glass walls shimmering with reflections of the harbor. Soft jazz humming low beneath the sound of waves, slapping gently against the pier. Inside, the ambiance was hushed and curated, like every word spoken was meant to be remembered. Ethan walked beside Riley, conscious of her presence in a way he hadn't anticipated. The scent of her perfume, soft, clean, unfamiliar, lingered in the air between them. As they approached the private dining room, a host opened the double doors with the reverence of a ceremony. Luca DeSantis stood to greet them. Tall, silver-haired, dressed in a navy suit that matched Riley's gown almost exactly. Camille rose beside him, elegant in pearl gray silk, her smile warm but observant. "Ethan," Luca said with a firm handshake. "Good to finally meet in person." "Likewise," Ethan replied, then gestured to Riley. "This is Riley Monroe, my partner." Riley stepped forward and extended her hand. "It's a pleasure." Camille smiled as she took it. "We've been looking forward to this evening." They all sat, menus arriving like choreography. The wine was poured, and polite conversation fluttered across the table. Business ventures, travel, brief anecdotes about cities they barely remembered. But beneath it all, there was a current. A quiet evaluation. Camille leaned in just slightly, eyes flicking to Ethan, then Riley. "So, how did you two meet?" Riley didn't flinch. She turned to Ethan, as if asking permission with her eyes, then spoke calmly. He came into the coffee shop where I work. It wasn't the most romantic setting. He was in a mood. I was having a rough morning. But somehow we ended up talking about books. I don't know. Something about the way he looked at East of Eden made me ask if he actually read it. Ethan let out a soft breath through his nose. And I told her I read it every January. Camille smiled. And you still pursued him after that confession? Riley grinned. Against my better judgment. Luca chuckled. Smart woman. As the courses arrived, roasted sea bass, truffle risotto, a beet salad too beautiful to eat, Ethan found himself relaxing, despite the stakes. Riley was natural, poised. Her responses didn't feel scripted because they weren't. She was speaking from someplace real, and it was working. Camille asked about Riley's writing. What do you like to write? Short fiction, mostly, Riley replied. Character-driven stuff. I like stories that don't need explosions to mean something. Ethan glanced at her. She hadn't told him that. It wasn't in any prep sheet. She was revealing herself in front of him, and it made his chest tighten, just slightly. Camille nodded thoughtfully. I find that the quiet stories stay with us longest. Luca turned his attention back to Ethan. So, tell me, where is Sinterra going next? It was his cue. Ethan launched into his vision. AI for accessibility, human-centric design, predictive care algorithms that could support aging populations. Luca listened intently, but Ethan noticed something unusual. His eyes kept drifting to Riley. When Ethan finished, Luca said nothing at first. Then, with a measured smile, Brilliant. But tell me, are you happy, Ethan? The table fell quiet. Ethan blinked. What? Luca leaned back. You've built a fortress in a world made of glass. But does any of it reflect who you really are? Ethan glanced at Riley. Her gaze was steady. Curious, unafraid. He hesitated. Then answered quietly. I'm starting to ask myself that. Luca nodded as if he'd been waiting for that answer. The dessert course arrived, but no one touched it. Conversation shifted to softer topics. Favorite cities, shared stories from Italy, Camille's obsession with lavender gelato. And then came the moment Riley didn't expect. Camille looked at her carefully. Forgive me if this is too personal, but what do you see in Ethan? Riley paused, fork poised mid-air. She set it down, then looked directly at Camille. I see someone who wants to be known, she said softly. Not for his net worth or his titles, but for who he is when no one's watching. And I think that takes more strength than people give him credit for. Camille smiled gently. That's a rare answer. Luca raised his glass. To rare answers and rare people. They toasted. By the time they stepped outside, the night had deepened. The city shimmered around them, and the wind from the water curled between buildings like a whispered song. In the car, they sat in silence for a while. Finally, Ethan turned to her. You were extraordinary. Riley didn't look at him. You looked surprised. I was. I shouldn't have been, but I was. She turned now, her voice lower. That woman asked me what I see in you. What would you have said if someone asked the same about me? Ethan didn't speak right away. His hands rested in his lap, still. I see someone who doesn't hide behind anything, he said at last. Who walks into a room of strangers and still manages to be the most honest person there. Who says things no one expects and means every word. Riley exhaled slowly, her gaze drifting back to the window. I don't know what happens after this, she said, almost to herself. But tonight felt real. It was, Ethan said, voice just above a whisper. More than I ever planned. She didn't answer, but her silence wasn't rejection. It was contemplation. The beginning of a new kind of uncertainty. As they pulled up to her building, he stepped out to walk her to the door. They paused at the steps, the porch light casting a soft glow over her face. Riley turned to him, keys in hand. This is a dangerous thing, you know. What is? Pretending something that wants to become real. He didn't know what to say to that. So he watched her go inside, the door closing behind her with a gentle finality that left the air strangely still. Ethan stood there for a long time, hands in his pockets, staring at a door he suddenly wished hadn't closed so easily. The next morning arrived wrapped in mist and grey light, the kind of Seattle day where time felt suspended, like the world was holding its breath. Ethan sat in his office, the walls of glass fogged slightly from the cold outside, his mind not on numbers or projections or code. Instead, it was on Riley, on the way she'd answered Camille's question, the steadiness in her voice, the way she didn't flinch when all eyes were on her. He couldn't shake the way she'd looked at him just before walking into her apartment, as if she already knew what he hadn't found the courage to admit, that the line between performance and reality was starting to blur fast. Jessie knocked once before letting herself in. "You're not looking at your morning metrics," she said. "Not today." She raised an eyebrow but didn't push. Instead, she handed him a thick manila envelope. These came from Camille's team, early draft partnership contracts. "Luca wants to move quickly." Ethan flipped it open, skimmed the first page, then stopped. "What is it?" Jessie asked. He turned the page so she could see a small handwritten note clipped to the top. "She's the best decision you've made in years. Don't underestimate what's real. Camille." Jessie smiled. She liked Riley. "Everyone does," Ethan murmured. He stood, walked to the window. The city was waking up below. Buses, umbrellas, hurried steps on wet sidewalks. "Would it be crazy," he said quietly, "to ask her to keep pretending?" "Just a little longer?" Jessie hesitated. "That depends. Are you still pretending?" He didn't answer. That afternoon, he stopped by Horizon Grounds. The bell jingled as he stepped inside, and for a moment, it felt like the first time again. The warmth, the scent of roasted beans, the gentle hum of indie music. Riley was behind the counter, tying an apron around her waist, hair pulled back, her cheeks still flushed from the cold. She looked up. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Not heat, not tension, recognition. "Hey," she said, wiping her hands. "Didn't expect to see you here without an entourage. I thought I'd try ordering my own coffee. Risky move, I know." She smiled. "Living dangerously, Carr." He stepped forward, leaned on the counter. "Got a minute?" She glanced around. "I'm off in 10 rounds. Meet me at that window seat." He waited, sipping something too sweet, watching her laugh with customers, greet regulars by name. She was alive in this space in a way he couldn't fully articulate, and something about that made his chest ache. 10 minutes later, she slid into the chair across from him. "I figured you might disappear after the dinner," she said, sipping her own drink. "Mission accomplished." "I didn't want it to be just that." She raised an eyebrow. "You want to do another fake dinner?" "No, not fake." Her face softened, but she didn't let him off the hook. "Then what?" "I want to keep seeing you." She set her cup down. "You mean casually?" He shook his head. "Not casual. And not as part of some image strategy. You don't know me." I'm starting to. You don't know if I'm messy, or impulsive, or terrible in relationships. I know you're honest. I know you care about people. I know you're brave enough to be real in a room where everyone else is performing. She looked down at her cup. Her voice dropped. You're used to people wanting things from you. He nodded. And you're used to people underestimating you. That made her look up. Silence. Just the sound of the cafe around them, soft and oblivious. Then, what about your investor deal? It's moving forward. Luca's in. Camille thinks I should spend more time with people who challenge me. Riley smiled slowly. Smart woman. He leaned in, elbows on the table. Can we see where this goes? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a thin notebook, the edges worn. She slid it across the table. What's this? Something I've been working on. Short stories. Not finished, not polished, but you said you wanted to know me. He took it carefully, like it might fall apart in his hands. I do. You can read it, she said, but no giving it to your PR team. He laughed, then grew quiet again. Thank you. For trusting me. She shrugged, but her voice betrayed her emotion. Don't make me regret it. They sat for a while longer, watching the world go by. Eventually, she stood. I've got to get back to work. Ethan rose with her. Can I call you tonight? You better. She started to walk away, then paused. One condition, she said, turning back. Name it. If this ever turns into another business deal, I walk. Ethan held her gaze. Deal. She left with a half smile, her apron fluttering behind her as she disappeared behind the counter. Ethan stepped outside into the gray afternoon, notebook clutched in his hand, heart suddenly a little louder in his chest. It wasn't the start he expected, but it was real, and for the first time in a long time, that was exactly what he wanted. The weekend came with clear skies, a rare stretch of sun across Seattle's typically brooding skyline. The air had a gentle crispness to it, fresh, but not biting, as if the city had briefly forgotten its reputation for melancholy. Riley stood in front of the full-length mirror in Ethan's penthouse, turning slightly in the new dress Lauren had picked out for the charity gala. It wasn't as formal as the investor dinner had been, but still upscale. Cocktail attire, soft piano music, high ceilings filled with polished people who liked their conversations, seasoned with power and influence. You sure this isn't overkill? Riley asked, smoothing the fabric nervously. Ethan, buttoning his cufflinks behind her, glanced up. Your understated elegance. You'll be the most grounded person there. Nice deflection, she said, adjusting one of the earrings Camille had loaned her. But I asked if it's too much. He stepped closer, meeting her eyes in the reflection. It's perfect. You're perfect. Her breath caught a little. Neither of them had said anything close to that, at least not in the light. But now, it hung between them, thick and electric. She turned. You ready? As I'll ever be. The car ride was quiet, but not awkward. Just full of the kind of silence that carries weight, like both of them knew tonight was more than a public appearance. It was a test, a moment, a step towards something neither could yet define. The venue was tucked along the water's edge, a renovated museum now used for exclusive events. Candlelight flickered behind the windows, and a quartet played something soft and sweeping just inside. As they entered, heads turned. Ethan Carr, the notoriously reclusive tech mogul, walking in with a woman no one in that world recognized. She wasn't an heiress, or a startup darling, or an investment banker's daughter. She was something else, and that made people curious. Too curious. They were greeted by a swirl of introductions. Board members, donors, other tech CEOs, and their glossed-up partners. Riley smiled through it all, graceful and quick-witted, her responses polished without feeling rehearsed. She remembered what Ethan told her. You don't have to be anything but yourself. So she wasn't. But not everyone in the room played fair. Halfway through the evening, while Ethan stepped aside to speak with a foundation director, Riley found herself at the hors d'oeuvres table, reaching for a mini crab cake, when a woman in a backless emerald dress leaned in beside her. "I'm sorry. I don't think we've met," the woman said, voice sweet as syrup and just as sticky. "Are you in tech or—" Riley turned, smile polite. "Not exactly. I'm with Ethan Carr." The woman's eyes sparkled. "Oh, I see. That's interesting. He's usually so private." Riley let the smile sharpen just slightly. "Guess he's full of surprises." "I'm sure," the woman said, pausing deliberately. "How did you two meet?" Riley tilted her head, unfazed. "Coffee shop. He ordered something overly complicated. I pretended it wasn't ridiculous. He tipped well." The woman blinked. Then, "And now you're here." Riley's voice didn't waver. "Here with him." Ethan appeared then, his hand resting gently on the small of Riley's back, picking up just enough tension in her posture to clock what had happened. "Everything all right?" he asked, voice low. Riley looked up at him and smiled sweetly. "Perfect." The woman in emerald vanished soon after. As the night wore on, Ethan and Riley found themselves on the balcony, city lights glittering beyond the water. The sounds of laughter and string instruments floated out from inside, but out here it was quieter. "I've never seen you that still," he said. Riley leaned on the railing, looking out. "It's a lot. All these people pretending they're not pretending. You handled it better than I did." She glanced at him. "There was a woman inside. Tried to get under my skin." "I saw. You don't have to explain anything. I'm used to people making assumptions. But just so you know, this thing between us, whatever it is, I'm not going to play by anyone else's script." He stepped closer. "I don't want you to." A breeze rolled in off the water, lifting the edges of her hair. She turned to face him, their bodies closer than they'd ever stood. "This was supposed to be one dinner," she said. "Now we're here, and I'm starting to forget which parts we made up." Ethan's jaw tightened. Not from discomfort, but because he knew exactly what she meant. "I haven't been pretending for a while," he admitted. The tension between them curled, slow and steady, like smoke. He reached for her hand, fingers brushing hers, gentle, careful. "I don't want to screw this up," he said quietly. "You haven't yet." A pause. Then Ethan leaned down, slower than slow, and kissed her. It wasn't dramatic or hungry. It was cautious, reverent. Like he was afraid the moment might dissolve if he moved too fast. When they finally pulled back, Riley didn't speak. Her eyes searched his face, her fingers still caught in his. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I," he replied. "But maybe that means it's real." They stayed on the balcony longer than they planned, missing the final toast, missing more introductions. But none of that mattered, because this moment under the city's lights, with nothing to sell and nothing to prove, was more than a chapter. It was a turning page, and neither of them wanted to look away. The photo showed up the next morning. Someone at the gala had snapped it. Ethan and Riley on the balcony, mid-kiss, city lights blurred behind them like a dreamscape. It was tasteful, soft focus, and painfully beautiful. And within hours, it was everywhere. Seattle's most private tech mogul seen locking lips at gala. But who is she? Riley stared at the article on her phone from the back corner of Horizon Grounds, the early shift just starting to shuffle in. A regular handed her a 10, and she almost dropped it. "Keep the change," he said, smirking. "You clean up nice." She forced a smile. "Thanks, Greg." Her co-worker, Amira, leaned over. "Okay, so, are we going to talk about it? Or do I pretend you're not trending?" Riley groaned. It was one photo. It's one photo with the most unreachable man in Seattle looking like he'd hand over his company for another minute with you. "That's not what it is," Amira grinned. "Does he know that?" Riley didn't answer. The truth was, she didn't know either. What started as a transaction had grown into something tangled and real. She could feel it every time Ethan looked at her, like she wasn't just a placeholder in his life, but a possibility. But now that gaze was in headlines. Her phone buzzed again. A new message from Ethan. "Can we talk? I'm coming by." She sighed. 15 minutes later, the cafe door opened, and in walked Ethan, looking sharp even in jeans and a sweater. Eyes followed him. The room hummed. Riley wiped her hands and met him near the condiment bar. "You caused a scene," she whispered. "I didn't take the photo." "No, but you didn't exactly duck either." "I didn't want to." She studied him. "You know people are going to assume I'm using you, or that you hired me. Again. I don't care what they assume. But I do, Ethan. I still work here. I have a sister in high school. My landlord reads those gossip blogs like scripture." He softened. "I understand. Let's go somewhere quiet." They walked out the back door, into the alley behind the cafe. It wasn't glamorous, but it was private. "I never wanted to put you in the spotlight," he said. "I thought we'd stay off the radar." "Well, that ship's been live tweeted," she muttered. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Don't," she said. "Not until we talk about what this is." Ethan paused. "Okay. I need to know. Are you just following this because it feels different? Or because it's real?" "It is real," her voice cracked. "How can you be so sure?" He stepped closer, not touching her, just closing the space. "Because when I saw that photo this morning, I didn't panic. I didn't call Jesse or PR, I just thought, yeah, that's the truth. And I'm tired of hiding from the truth." Riley looked away. "You're not the one who has to worry about being dragged." "No," he said, "but I can shield you from it. I can make sure—" "Don't do that." He stopped. "Don't turn me into another PR problem to solve. I don't want protection, Ethan. I want partnership." That landed. He nodded slowly. "All right." Silence stretched again, thick with things unsaid. Then he added, "Come with me this weekend. There's a cabin outside Leavenworth. No press. No tech. Just trees, quiet, and maybe answers." She blinked. "Are you serious? I need to get out of the noise. And I want to know who we are without it." Riley stared at him, and then quietly, "Okay." The next day, they drove out of the city. The mountains rose in the distance like sleeping giants, snow-capped and ancient. The road twisted through forests and tiny towns, Ethan behind the wheel, Riley in the passenger seat, feet curled under her. They didn't talk much, but they didn't need to. The cabin was tucked into a clearing, all wood and stone and oversized windows facing the trees. No Wi-Fi, no distractions. Inside, Riley wandered the space, running her fingers along the shelves, lined with old books and postcards. "You used to come here a lot?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Before Sintera, when I needed to think. And now? Now, I need to feel." That night, after dinner, they sat in front of the fireplace, logs crackling low. Riley sipped tea from a chipped mug. "You're different out here. So are you." She looked at him. "You're quieter, less calculated. And you're more open. Is that good?" He reached out, brushed a loose strand of hair from her cheek. "It's beautiful." She looked away, her throat tight. "I'm scared." "So am I." They sat in silence again. Then, softly, she asked, "What happens if this doesn't work?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. Then we'll know we tried. Honestly. Not out of convenience or image, but because we wanted to." Her eyes filled, just enough to shine. And when he leaned in this time, she didn't pull away. The kiss was slower, deeper. Not about performance or headlines, just two people, stripped of everything but the truth. The flames flickered beside them, and for a few quiet moments, the world outside disappeared. The morning light slipped through the trees, dappled and golden, casting soft beams across the wooden floor of the cabin. Riley stirred first, tucked beneath a heavy wool blanket, the air in the room cool but comforting. She blinked up at the ceiling for a long moment, her body still wrapped in warmth, her mind somewhere between peace and disbelief. Ethan lay beside her on the oversized couch, one hand resting near hers, as if he hadn't quite meant to touch her, but couldn't help drifting close. She sat up slowly, careful not to wake him, and padded barefoot toward the kitchen. The cabin was quiet, in the most sacred way. No notifications, no murmurs of traffic or commerce. Just the faint rustle of wind through pine needles, and the soft creak of wood settling in the cold. She boiled water for tea, moving slowly, deliberately, like each motion helped make sense of the feelings tumbling inside her. Last night hadn't been just intimate. It had been emotional, stripped of the armor they both wore in the city. She hadn't felt like anyone's placeholder, and he hadn't looked at her like she was filling a role. He looked at her like he was trying to remember what it meant to belong to something real. When she turned back toward the living room, he was awake, hair tousled, sitting upright with a blanket still wrapped around his shoulders. "You always up this early?" he asked, his voice low, groggy. "Only when I don't want something to end." He studied her for a beat, eyes soft. "You're not leaving, are you?" "I was making tea." "Oh." He smiled. "In that case, stay forever." She smirked and walked over, handing him a mug. "You're not a morning person, are you?" "I'm not a people person. Could have fooled me last night." His smile faltered for just a second, honest vulnerability flashing behind his eyes. "I meant what I said," he murmured. "I know." She sat beside him, their shoulders brushing. "What happens when we go back?" she asked, staring into her cup. "When the world comes back with all its noise and judgment. We don't owe anyone a version of this that makes sense to them." She looked at him. "But we do owe ourselves the truth." "Then here it is," he said, putting his mug down. "I haven't felt this grounded in years. Not when my company IPO'd. Not when I landed my first seed round. Not even when they put my face on the cover of Tech Weekly." She breathed in slowly. "That scares me." "Me too." They stayed there, the cabin quiet around them. A knock on the cabin door broke the silence. Riley startled. Did you invite someone? No. Ethan stood, cautious, pulling open the door just slightly. It was a local delivery driver, an older man with a wide smile and a thermos in hand. Mr. Carr? He asked. Package from Seattle. Dropped it off with me since the road-in was closed overnight. Ethan blinked. Thanks. That's strange. He took the envelope and shut the door. What is it? Riley asked. He opened it slowly. Inside was a single printed page. A news article. The headline hit him like cold air. Mystery woman dating Ethan Carr once sued for defamation. Is his heart or company at risk? Beneath it, a blurry photo of Riley, taken years ago outside a courthouse. The article speculated about her past, her motives, whether she was just another Cinderella story clawing her way up the tech food chain. Ethan's jaw tightened. Riley stood frozen across the room. What is that? She asked, already knowing. He handed it to her in silence. She read quickly, the color draining from her face. This was years ago. A co-worker lied about me and I stood up for myself. The case didn't even go anywhere. It was dropped. He moved toward her. I believe you. I can't believe they dug this up, she said, voice cracking. This wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't want this. You didn't do anything wrong. I'm not ashamed of it, she said, her voice rising. I'm just tired of people turning truth into something ugly. She set the paper down, her hands trembling. I thought I was okay with the world knowing about us, she whispered. But I didn't expect it to come for me like this. He stepped closer, gently taking her hand. Then let me help. I don't want to be rescued, Ethan. I'm not rescuing you, he said. I'm standing next to you. Her eyes searched his face, and slowly the trembling stopped. He wrapped his arms around her, not to silence her, not to fix the mess, but to simply hold the storm steady. They didn't speak for a while. Later that afternoon, they sat on the back porch, watching the wind ripple through the trees. What happens next? She asked, quieter now. We go home, he said. We walk into the noise. Together. And when someone asks again what I am to you, he looked at her. You're the only thing I've ever chosen without hesitation. A tear slipped down her cheek, quiet as the wind, and she let it fall. Because finally, she didn't have to be strong alone. The return to Seattle wasn't as gentle as the trees and quiet cabin had made it seem it could be. Monday morning hit with headlines. Riley's name in clickbait. Forums questioning her intentions. Podcasts speculating on her type. Anonymous Twitter accounts digging up photos of her from a college party with a plastic crown and a beer in hand. The kind of image people use to confirm their own narratives, not uncover truth. Inside Cinterra's office, Ethan stood with Jesse near the tinted glass wall of the executive floor, the city humming just beyond. I've already spoken with PR, Jesse said, tablet in hand. We're putting out a general statement. No comment on personal matters, just a reaffirmation of Cinterra's mission. Calm, neutral, distant. Ethan turned from the window. No? Jesse blinked. No? We're not doing neutral. We're not doing distant. Ethan, I'm not going to treat Riley like a liability just because the world can't handle a woman with a spine and a story. Jessie closed her tablet slowly. So what are you going to do? I'm going to be honest. Then do it soon, she said, walking away, because the headlines won't wait. Across town, Riley sat alone in the corner booth of a quiet bookstore cafe, hoodie up, laptop open. She wasn't answering texts. Not even from Amira. Not even from Haley. The article was open on her screen. She hadn't intended to read it again, but it was like a wound you had to keep checking to believe it was still real. Manipulative. Gold digger. Opportunist. Former defamation plaintiff with a chip on her shoulder. Her jaw clenched. She knew who she was. She had fought for the truth before. She had clawed through shame and judgment and half-truths. But this felt different. Not just a comment on her character, but a rewriting of it. Her phone buzzed. "Ethan, meet me at the rooftop garden, the one you said looked like a dream." She hesitated, then closed her laptop and grabbed her coat. When she arrived, the rooftop was quiet, just past golden hour. The glass and steel skyline shimmered, and rows of lavender and rosemary spilled from raised planters. The world felt farther away up here. Ethan was waiting near the edge, hands in his coat pockets. "You came," he said softly. "I didn't want to." "I know." She stopped a few feet away. "I don't know how to live in this version of my life. The one where I can't go get coffee without someone wondering if I'm doing it for a headline." "You don't have to live in that version. That's the thing, Ethan. I don't get to choose anymore. You brought me into your world, but you get to walk out of it any time you want. I don't." His face tightened. "I never asked you to carry this alone. But I am carrying it alone." The wind whipped softly between them, the city buzzing far below. "I read your story," Ethan said suddenly. She blinked. "What?" "The one you gave me. The lighthouse between us. I read it cover to cover the night we got back." Her breath caught. "And you know what stayed with me?" he asked. "It wasn't the ending. It was the middle. The part where the lighthouse keeper admits he's never been afraid of storms, only of letting someone close enough to see him tremble." He stepped closer. "I'm trembling, Riley. Every day. But I'm not going to shut the door." She looked away, eyes wet. "I'm sorry," he said, quieter now, "for not preparing you. For not shielding you. For not realizing that being with me means fighting shadows I never had to name." "I don't want to be shielded," she said. "I want to be chosen." He reached out, his voice breaking. "You were never anything but chosen." Silence. Then she stepped into his arms, slow and sure. The city didn't disappear. The headlines didn't fade, but something steadied inside her, like standing in the center of a storm with someone who wouldn't run. Later that night, Ethan posted something to his personal account. No press release, no PR filter, just a photo of Riley's short story open to the final page. And one line typed beneath, "She's not part of my image. She's the reason I finally stepped out of it." The post went viral within hours. But for once, the comments weren't sharp with suspicion. They were filled with something else. Respect. And in a quiet corner of a not-so-quiet world, Ethan and Riley watched the ripple begin. Not of damage control, but of something far rarer. Understanding. Rain slid in gentle streams down the windows of Ethan's penthouse, smearing the lights of downtown Seattle into abstract brushstrokes. The space was quiet, not sterile like before. Riley's book lay open on the kitchen counter. A mug sat beside it, with her lipstick still faintly marking the rim, and a scarf she'd forgotten clung to the back of a chair like it belonged there. Ethan leaned on the edge of the kitchen island, phone in hand, staring at the inbox that had flooded in since his post. Investors. Journalists. Friends he hadn't heard from in years. The irony of opening himself up and suddenly being more seen than ever wasn't lost on him. But none of that mattered compared to what Jessie had just told him an hour ago. She submitted a new piece, she'd said over the phone, excitement threading through her calm. To Northwest Quarterly, They're reading it now. He hadn't told Riley he knew. Not yet, because something told him she needed to do this one without him hovering. Just then the elevator dinged. He straightened as Riley stepped in, hair damp, cheeks flushed from the cold. She carried a bag of groceries, set them down and gave him a cautious smile. Brought dinner. He crossed to her, kissed her cheek gently. You didn't have to. I wanted to. They moved around each other in the kitchen like they'd done it a dozen times. It felt natural, even though it hadn't been. Chopping vegetables, boiling pasta, her hands brushing past his to steal slices of red pepper when she thought he wasn't looking. You're quiet tonight, she said, rinsing herbs under cool water. So are you. Long day. He watched her for a moment, then, carefully, You could tell me. She hesitated. Tell you what? I know about the story. Her hands stilled in the sink. I didn't read it, he said quickly. Jesse mentioned you submitted something. I only know that much. Riley turned slowly, drying her hands on a towel. It's the first thing I've sent out under my real name in 3 years, she said quietly. No pseudonyms. No middle initials, just me. Ethan took a step closer. That's huge. It's terrifying. Why? She swallowed. Because if they hate it, they're not rejecting a character. They're rejecting me. And for the first time, I'm not sure I can take that. He reached out, touched her elbow gently. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. I know, she said, but her voice faltered. It's just, this is who I've always been, before I met you. Before the headlines, before the stories. I just want to be something that's mine. Ethan's voice dropped. You are. She looked up at him, eyes searching. And if they publish it, he continued, it'll be because they saw the same thing in your words I saw in you that day at the cafe. What's that? Truth. They stood there for a long beat, the only sound the soft bubbling of the pot on the stove. Then Riley let out a breath, and a smile cracked through. You always say the right thing. No, he said, pulling her gently into his arms. Only when it's about you. They ate dinner curled up on the couch, plates balanced on their knees, a documentary playing in the background more for noise than attention. At one point, Riley leaned her head against his shoulder, fingers curled around the edge of his sleeve. I got an email tonight, she said softly. Ethan looked down. Yeah? She pulled out her phone, opened it, then handed it to him without speaking. The subject line was simple. Accepted for publication. Small spaces by Riley Monroe. He read it twice, then looked at her. Tears had gathered in the corners of her eyes, but she wasn't crying. Not fully, not yet. I don't know what to do with this feeling, she whispered. He squeezed her hand. You sit in it. You let it remind you that you're not who they say you are. You're who you've always been. She nodded, voice thick. It's about us, the story. I figured. It's not a fairy tale, not a perfect ending. Just two people who meet in the mess and choose to stay. He leaned in, forehead resting against hers. That's exactly the kind of ending I want. Riley exhaled shakily. I think I do too. Later that night, after she had fallen asleep beside him, her head resting on his chest, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Not with worry, not with anxiety, but with the ache of gratitude. Because somewhere between strategy and survival, between pretending and protecting, he'd found something real. Not just in her, but in himself. And for the first time, The silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like peace. The morning started with sun, the kind of rare golden light that made Seattle feel like it was trying to apologize for weeks of rain. Riley stood on the balcony of Ethan's penthouse, fingers curled around a mug of tea, wrapped in one of his sweaters that hung off her shoulders like it didn't want to let go. She should have felt whole. She should have felt steady. Her story had been accepted. People were reaching out to praise it, not dissect her. Ethan had stood beside her in the storm, not once stepping back. And yet, something tugged at her, just beneath the surface. A restlessness, a question that wouldn't stay quiet. She stared out at the city, watching the sunlight glitter across the bay. The phone buzzed beside her, a message from Camille. "Lunch today. Just you and me. I'll pick the place. No pressure, but I think you'll want to hear this in person." Riley's stomach tightened. She typed out a response, hesitated, then deleted it and simply sent, "Okay." Later that afternoon, they met at a quiet bistro on the edge of Pioneer Square. Camille was already there, seated at a back table, her posture as regal as ever, sipping an espresso like she was born with it in hand. Riley approached, heart thudding. "You look tired," Camille said gently, setting her cup down. Riley slid into the seat across from her. "That's one way to say it." "I won't keep you long," Camille said. "But I need to ask you something." Riley waited. Camille leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Did Ethan tell you about the Sintera restructure?" Riley blinked. "What restructure?" Camille's expression tightened. "He's about to split the company. 2 arms. One tech-driven, one human-centric. Community mentorships, education grants, ethical AI development. It's a pivot, a massive one." Riley's throat dried. "He didn't mention that. And he's going to announce it publicly next month, with you at his side." Riley's breath hitched. "I didn't know that either." Camille studied her face. "Do you know why he's doing it?" "Because he believes in it?" Camille shook her head. "Because he believes in you. Because you've changed how he sees everything. Business. Success. Legacy." "I never asked him to—" "I'm not accusing you," Camille said quickly, "but I am warning you. Be sure you're ready for what that means." "What does it mean?" Camille's voice softened. "It means he's tying his future to yours. Not as a boyfriend. As a man rebuilding his empire around the first person who's ever made him question why he built it the way he did." Riley felt her heart knock hard against her ribs. "I love him," she said, almost involuntarily. Camille nodded. "I know, but love without clarity can become dependency, and dependency, when it breaks, doesn't bend. It shatters." They sat in silence for a long moment, the hum of the cafe around them fading into a low throb. "Why are you telling me this?" Riley asked. "Because I've watched powerful men destroy good things trying to prove they're still in control," Camille said. "Ethan isn't one of them. Yet. But he's on the edge. And so are you." Riley looked away, blinking fast. "I need to think," she said quietly. Camille nodded. "That's all I ask." That night, Ethan came home late. Riley was already there, lights dim, curled up on the couch with a legal pad in her lap, scribbling. He dropped his keys in the bowl by the door, walked over, leaned down to kiss her forehead. But she pulled back slightly. "Not away, just not forward," he noticed. "You okay?" he asked. She looked up, eyes searching his. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said. "Tell you what?" "About splitting the company. About the announcement. about tying it all to me. He stood there, silent. She pressed, more gently this time. Why did I have to hear that from Camille? Ethan sat down beside her, ran a hand through his hair. I didn't want to put pressure on you, he said. It wasn't about tying anything to you. It was about becoming the man I should have been before I met you. But if you build this on me, and something breaks, it won't. You can't know that. He paused. His voice, when it came, was quiet. I don't know how to love halfway. I'm not asking you to. Then what are you asking? Riley stood, pacing now, her hands clutched around the legal pad. I'm asking you to slow down, to let this be ours before it becomes public property. He looked up at her, pain flickering in his eyes. I thought I was honoring you. I think you were, she said, kneeling beside him. But you were also building something for both of us without asking if we both wanted it. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. I do want it, she said, but not like this, not as a symbol, as a partner. The silence between them wasn't cold. It was heavy, full of things finally being said. I'll hold the announcement, he said at last. Riley let out a breath. Thank you. They sat there on the floor, hand in hand, the city pulsing outside like it always did. And though nothing shattered, the shift was undeniable. Because now, they weren't standing in the afterglow of becoming. They were standing at the edge of what came next. And what came next would test everything. The next week passed like a slow-moving tide, calm on the surface but tugging hard underneath. Ethan was quieter than usual, not withdrawn, but measured, thoughtful. Every decision came with a pause now. Every offer to Riley was framed with care, as if he was checking himself before asking too much, too soon. It was his way of honoring what she'd asked. Space. Partnership. Clarity. But Riley felt the pressure shift too. Not in his words, he'd been careful with those, but in the silence between them. A silence full of questions, neither of them quite knew how to ask. She threw herself into writing, finishing edits on her upcoming piece for Northwest Quarterly, doing late-night journaling that read more like confession than craft. She spent mornings back at Horizon Grounds, the routine of pouring coffee grounding her in a way headlines never could. Still, her name lingered in the air like static. Customers whispered. Some stared. A few asked questions too blunt to be curious. You're the one dating the billionaire, right? You ever worry he's just playing a long game? You think he's changed for real, or is this just a phase? She smiled when she needed to. Nodded when she had to, but every word cut a little deeper, even if she didn't show it. One afternoon, Ethan showed up at the cafe with no warning, holding 2 coffees and a quiet expression. I figured you wouldn't come to me, he said. So I came to you. She stepped outside, still in her apron, rubbing her hands together against the cold. Everything okay? She asked. I think I'm about to make the second biggest decision of my career, he said. She looked at him, cautious. What's the first? You. The words hit harder than she expected. He continued. Camille and Luca are hosting a summit next month, Ethics in Tech. International press. Big voices. They want me to be the keynote. Okay. I want to say yes. But not as the guy who builds things. As the guy who admits he built them wrong. Her breath caught. I want to tell them the truth, he said. That I used to think power came from staying distant. That I believed keeping people out was the only way to stay in control. and I want to tell them I was wrong. Because someone walked into my life who reminded me that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's leadership. Riley stared at him, heart racing. You're talking about me. I'm talking about us. She didn't speak. He took a breath. But I won't do it if you're not comfortable. If it risks your peace, your voice, your space, I'll step back. I mean it. Riley looked away, eyes glinting in the cold sunlight. I'm not afraid of being seen. I'm afraid of being swallowed. I won't let that happen. And if it does anyway? Then we rebuild, he said. On your terms. She took the coffee from him, sipped slowly, thinking. Finally, she said, then you should do it. But not about me. Not for me. Just with me in mind. His smile was quiet, full of something deep and warm. Always. Later that night, she stood in the kitchen of the penthouse, stirring pasta while Ethan sat on the stool behind her, reading drafts of his speech aloud. Progress isn't made in silence. It's made when someone looks at the machine they built and asks if it still deserves to run. Too much? She turned, tasting the line on her tongue. Just enough. He grinned, scribbled a note. Then, you'll come, right? To the summit? She hesitated, then nodded. As long as I get a back row seat, and no one asks me to give a TED talk. No promises, he teased. You're dangerously articulate. As they ate by the window, city lights glowing like stars below, Riley set her fork down and leaned on her elbow. You know this isn't the end of the hard part, right? I know. Things might get messier before they get clearer. I'm not afraid of messy. Good, she said softly. Because I don't do perfect. Ethan reached across the table, took her hand. I never wanted perfect, he said. Just honest. The room went quiet again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was full, and for the first time in weeks, the silence between them felt like an answer. The summit weekend arrived with a bite of wind and a forecast full of unexpected sunshine. Seattle, always unpredictable, had decided, for once, to play nice. The city buzzed with arrivals, entrepreneurs, ethicists, journalists, and people whose names carried weight in industries built on speed, algorithms, and ambition. Ethan stood in front of the mirror at the boutique hotel Camille had booked for the event, adjusting the slim charcoal tie that Riley had picked for him. He looked sharp but not curated. Human. That was the goal. Behind him, Riley moved around the room, tucking papers into her tote, straightening her jacket, not saying much. She hadn't said much all morning. He turned. You okay? She glanced up. Yeah. You don't sound convinced. I'm fine, she said, softer now. It's just big. It is. And I'm not used to walking into rooms where everyone's already decided who I'm supposed to be. Ethan crossed the space between them slowly, resting his hands lightly on her shoulders. Then let them be wrong, he said. We'll show them. She searched his eyes, then nodded once. Okay. They arrived through a private entrance, escorted by event staff who moved like they'd rehearsed every moment. Name badges, VIP passes, subtle nods and murmurs as they passed. Camille greeted them in the green room, all warmth and quiet energy. You look good, she said to Ethan. Then, turning to Riley, and you look like someone who knows exactly who she is. Riley offered a tight smile. Let's hope I remember. Camille touched her arm gently. Don't worry. They'll feel it before you say a word. The conference hall was packed. Rows of chairs filled with the polished, the powerful, and the perpetually skeptical. The stage was sleek. 2 armchairs for the fireside conversation format. A backdrop of shifting light and minimalist visuals. Subtle, but cinematic. Ethan stood backstage, waiting for the introduction. Riley remained just beyond the curtain, out of view but close enough to hear every breath he took. The host stepped up, microphone in hand. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Synterra Labs founder and today's keynote guest, Ethan Carr. Polite applause. A few eager faces. A few blank ones. Ethan walked out, his steps steady. Sat. Waited for the room to settle. Then he looked up. I've spent the last decade building systems that predict behavior, scale decisions, and reduce uncertainty. What I didn't realize was that in the process, I became the least uncertain person I knew. A pause. Quiet. I made every choice by calculation, hired by numbers. Spoke through data. I thought that made me strong. He glanced briefly off stage. Riley stood just in the shadows watching. But the truth is, I wasn't strong. I was safe, controlled. And when people asked who I was beyond my company, I didn't have an answer. He shifted forward in the chair, more present now. I met someone recently. She wasn't from this world. She didn't care about balance sheets or media spin. She asked me what I read, what I believed. And when I didn't know how to answer, she didn't walk away. A murmur swept through the room. She reminded me that vulnerability is not weakness. It's how we stay honest, how we stay human. And if we can't build companies with room for that kind of truth, then we're building something that will collapse under its own detachment. He sat back, letting it breathe. I'm restructuring Synterra. Not just in mission, but in mindset. We'll innovate, yes, but we'll also listen. We'll create, but not at the expense of connection. Because at the heart of every breakthrough is a person, a beat, and I finally remembered how to be one. The audience was still for a moment. Then a ripple of applause. Then more, genuine, thoughtful, not thunderous, but warm. Backstage, Riley exhaled slowly, her hands unclenching from the fists she hadn't realized she'd made. After the talk, people swarmed him. Handshakes, questions, flashes of approval dressed as curiosity. Riley stayed back, content to watch. Until Camille approached, smiling. Come with me. She led Riley down a side hall and into a smaller room lined with books and soft chairs. Ethan stood there alone, holding a glass of water, the tie now loosened slightly. When he saw Riley, he set it down and crossed the room without hesitation. You did it, she said, voice hushed. I didn't do anything without you. She shook her head. No, that was all you. He stopped in front of her, hesitant for just a second. Then she stepped into his arms and rested her forehead against his chest. I was proud of you, she whispered. Like, heart in my throat, proud. His voice was quiet. I wanted to be someone you could be proud of. You already were. They stood there in silence, the soft hum of the world just beyond the door. After a moment, he pulled back slightly, brushing a thumb along her cheek. Stay, he said. I'm not going anywhere. No, he said, eyes locked on hers. I mean, in this, with me, beyond the summit, beyond the noise. She looked up at him, heart racing. Ask me again, she said, voice shaking a little. He did. And this time, she didn't hesitate. Yes. A quiet stretch of late winter settled over Seattle, painting the sky in muted pastels, the kind that blurred morning and evening into a single soft hush. The summit had faded from headlines, but not from hearts. Ethan's speech had sparked more than press. It had started conversations in boardrooms, classrooms, editorial columns. His words were still echoing. And yet, none of that compared to what was unfolding in the small, still moments between him and Riley. They'd started living together, not in some grand announcement, but in a slow, seamless folding of lives. Her notebooks filled the shelves he once kept empty. His record player played jazz during her writing hours. The scent of her rosemary shampoo lingered in his towels. It all felt inevitable. Like coming home to a place neither had known they were missing. But one morning, just as spring teased its arrival with sun breaking through the mist, something changed. Riley sat at the kitchen counter, a mug of coffee in one hand, a thick envelope in the other. It was from Northwest Quarterly. She'd already been published once. But this wasn't a submission reply. This was a different envelope entirely, thicker, more formal. Ethan walked in, hair damp from a shower, rolling up the sleeves of his shirt. "You're up early." She held the envelope out to him. "It came," he frowned. "What is it?" "An offer," she said. "A book deal. Based on my story. They want to option The Lighthouse between us for a full-length novel." Ethan's expression shifted. Relief, pride, something else beneath it. "Riley, that's incredible. They want me to write it in 6 months. With a marketing campaign, book tours, readings." He stepped closer. "That's everything you've wanted." "It is. But," she looked down, "they want me to do it in New York." The silence hit sharp. "For how long?" he asked quietly. 6 months minimum, maybe longer if the rollout expands. Ethan sat down beside her, his voice even. "And what do you want?" She shook her head slowly. "I want both. I want this life, you, us. But I also want to know what I'm capable of when I stop shrinking." His throat worked. "I would never ask you to shrink." "I know that," she said, eyes wet. "But I'm scared of what it'll cost us." He reached across the counter, took her hand. "I didn't fall in love with someone who would say no to something like this. I fell in love with someone who writes truth into the world. You have to go. And you? I'll visit. We'll call. I'll show up when you least expect it and make you laugh in some cramped Manhattan bookstore." She let out a breathy laugh, blinking fast. "I don't want to lose us," she said. "Then we won't let go. But we'll change. We're supposed to." A pause. "Will you be okay?" she asked. He smiled, a little sad, a little proud. "I'll miss you in everything. In coffee mugs and open windows, and when I reach for someone who isn't there. But I'll be okay. Because loving you isn't about holding you here. It's about letting you grow." She got up slowly, walked to him, and knelt in front of his chair, her arms wrapping around his waist. He held her close, burying his face in her hair. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you more," he murmured. "And I'll be here when the ink dries." 2 weeks later, they stood at the airport, surrounded by rolling luggage and soft goodbyes. No tears. Not today. Just one final, quiet moment before distance became a part of their story. Ethan kissed her forehead. "Send me the first draft." Riley smiled, eyes glinting. "Only if you promise to mark it up like a ruthless editor." "I'll make it unreadable." She laughed. And then she turned, walked toward the gate, never looking back. Not out of coldness, but strength. He watched until she was gone. And in the weeks that followed, their lives stretched across time zones, but never apart. Late-night video calls with her hair messy and his voice rough with sleep. Voice notes left during taxi rides. Book covers sent for approval. Care packages with Seattle coffee beans and New York bagels. Their love didn't shrink, it adapted. And in the quiet of his now solo mornings, Ethan read the early pages of her manuscript, sent one at a time, like letters, each one better than the last. Each one telling not just a fictional love story, but their love story. And chapter by chapter, they built something that distance couldn't weaken. Because they had stopped pretending and started choosing every single day. The bookstore was tucked on a quiet corner in Brooklyn, the kind of place with creaky wooden floors, shelves that reached too high, and an air that smelled like stories. A handwritten sign out front read, "Tonight, author reading, signing, Riley Monroe, The Lighthouse Between Us." Inside, the lights were warm and low, the folding chairs filled. A soft buzz hung in the air. Curious readers, local writers, a few industry folks. But Riley only heard the rush in her own chest. She stood at the podium near the front, a copy of her book in one hand, the other gripping the edge to steady herself. Her smile was soft, steady, but the emotion behind it shimmered just beneath the surface. "Thank you for being here," she said into the mic, her voice calm but thick with feeling. "I've been writing stories since I was 10, but this one came from somewhere deeper." She glanced down at the book, then slowly opened it. This is a scene about two people who think they're pretending, until they realize they're the only real thing in each other's lives. She began to read. Outside the window, night had fully arrived, the city moving quietly around them. But in that room, time stilled. Halfway through the passage, she looked up, and her voice faltered for just a moment. Because there he was. Ethan. Standing in the back, coat still damp from a New York spring rain, hair a little longer, eyes locked on hers like she was the only thing in the world. He hadn't told her he was coming. She blinked, swallowed, and kept reading, because she had to finish this moment before she could walk into the next one. When it was done, the applause came fast and warm, not explosive. Just full. People lined up with books, compliments, questions. She signed each one with care, but her eyes kept flicking to the end of the room, where Ethan stood patiently, hands in his coat pockets. Finally, the line thinned. The last fan stepped away, and Ethan stepped forward. She looked up. "Hey." "Hey," he said, voice low and familiar. "You were unbelievable. You came. Wouldn't have missed it. You didn't tell me. I wanted to surprise you." She smiled. "Consider me surprised." He reached into his coat, pulled something out. A copy of her book, open to the dedication page. He handed it to her. She read the inscription he'd penciled in beneath her printed words. "You wrote us into something permanent. Let me return the favor." She looked up, confused, heart thudding. He took a small, deep breath. "I was going to wait until you came back to Seattle," he said. "But honestly, that's not who we are anymore." "We don't wait." He pulled a small velvet box from his coat pocket and set it quietly on the table in front of her. She stared at it. He didn't open it. He just said softly, "I don't want a fairy tale. I want the truth. I want every chapter, even the ones that scare us. I want to live in the margins with you." Her eyes welled, but she didn't cry. She stood slowly, picked up the box and opened it herself. Inside, a simple gold ring. Elegant, no pretense, just a promise. She looked at him, emotion making her voice catch. "I wasn't pretending either," she said. "Not even for a second." He smiled, stepped closer. "So, what do you say?" She didn't speak. She leaned in and kissed him, not for show, not for closure, just because there was nothing else left to say. The bookstore erupted in soft claps and cheers, strangers moved by something real, something rare. Later, after the crowd had thinned and the lights had dimmed, they sat on the steps outside, their coats wrapped around them, her head on his shoulder. "You know," she murmured, "someone asked me once how we met, what I saw in you." He looked down at her. "What did you say?" "I said you paid me to be your date." He laughed softly. "But I stayed," she added, voice low and warm, "because I finally met someone who wasn't afraid to be rewritten." He kissed the top of her head. "And because I fell in love with the story we never planned to tell." Rain began to fall. Light, soft, like punctuation at the end of a sentence. They didn't move, because the story wasn't ending, it was just beginning. The first spring rain fell soft and steady, tapping against the skylights of a restored bookstore nestled in a quiet corner of Queen Anne. Inside, the air was warm with the scent of paper and pinewood shelves, the kind of place that felt like it remembered things for you. Riley stood at the front table, smoothing the stack of newly released hardcovers, her name embossed in gold across the deep blue jacket. The Lighthouse Between Us. Her first full novel. Her story. The room hummed with gentle conversation and the occasional clink of mugs from the adjacent cafe. Folding chairs had been arranged in neat rows, most already filled. A banner strung across the back wall read, "A Seattle Homecoming. Author reading and signing with Riley Monroe." She hadn't expected the crowd. She hadn't expected the nerves either. But they were there, tucked beneath her ribcage, fluttering like birds on the verge of flight. "You ready?" Camille asked, appearing beside her with a knowing smile. Riley turned, exhaled slowly. "I think so." "You don't have to make it perfect," Camille said. "Just make it true." That helped. She stepped up to the small podium, the low hum of chatter fading into expectant quiet. Faces looked up, kind and curious, some familiar, some not. Somewhere in the third row, Ethan sat, one leg crossed over the other, hands folded in his lap, eyes locked on hers like she was the only voice in the world that mattered. Riley smiled. "Hi," she began, her voice steady but soft. "Thank you for being here. This book, this story, is about what happens when life interrupts the plans we think we need to survive. When something unexpected, someone unexpected, teaches us how to be braver." She paused, scanning the room. "It's fiction, technically, but it's also full of truths. About fear and trust, and what it really means to be seen. Not for the curated version of yourself, but for the messy, unfinished, brilliant parts." She opened the book to a marked page. "This is from the middle, the turning point." And then she read. The room held its breath with her. By the time she closed the book, applause rose slowly, soft at first, then warm and full. The kind that wasn't about noise, but connection. The kind that said, "You brought us somewhere and we're glad you did." Afterward, the signing line stretched long. Riley smiled until her cheeks ached, inscribing names into fresh pages, hugging strangers who quoted her own sentences back to her. Somewhere in the blur, Amira came through with a coffee and a wink. Haley followed, now a junior at UW, proud and just a little teary-eyed. And finally, when the line thinned and the night leaned into quiet again, Ethan stepped forward, holding a copy already signed. To Ethan, he read aloud, smirking. Who paid me for a date. But I stayed for the story. He looked up at her. That's the line, huh? She smiled. It's the truth. Then let me give you the next one. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, weathered envelope. She recognized it instantly. Her own handwriting. The letter she had once left him before disappearing. He held it out. I never opened it. Her brow furrowed. Why not? Because I didn't want to remember what goodbye looked like. I wanted to remember what choosing each other looked like. She took the envelope gently, her eyes locked on his. And now? Now, he said, I want to add something to it. He pulled out a small, folded piece of fresh stationery from his pocket and tucked it inside the envelope with hers. For our next chapter, he said. Together. Her voice was thick. What does it say? You'll read it in the morning, preferably with coffee and one of your ridiculous playlists in the background. She laughed, blinking away the tears. Deal. They stood there, surrounded by shelves and pages, and the quiet awe of everything they had built. Not out of perfection, not out of ease, but out of truth. Riley reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. You know, she whispered, I never thought love would look like this. Me neither, he said, kissing her knuckles. But I think we rewrote the rules. Outside, the rain kept falling, gentle, steady, sure, not washing anything away, but making everything grow. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way.